nominee, and I will be presiding. So I first want to ask everyone, councilors, everyone, put your phones away. This is a very respectful day, this nominee, and we want to be respectful. And we ask the councilors to stay to the end to hear all the comments of this nominee, okay? This is a very important hearing. So with that, I will introduce the people that I serve with. Councilor Ferrara.
Good afternoon.
Councilor Iannella. Councilor Duff. Councilor DiPaolo. And Councilor Jacobs. Now, okay, so we will start, and I will begin with a letter from the governor, and I welcome you. Dear councilors, I am pleased to nominate Sarah Kennedy to the position of Associate Justice of the District Court. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I am enclosing the nominee's resume for your convenience. So having said that, I am going to start with your witnesses, okay? So the first witness is the Honorable Lisa Ann Brandt. So if you can sit beside the nominee and
Very much. Good afternoon, councilors.
I know.
It is truly a privilege to be here to speak in support of Sarah Kennedy's nomination. Sarah and I first met in 2012 when she interviewed for a position with the Committee for Public Counsel Services. As you know, not everyone can successfully transition from being a prosecutor to a defense attorney. However, it was clear that Sarah had been an ethical prosecutor, interested in truly doing justice, and that as a public defender, she would fully embrace the role of zealous advocacy on behalf of indigent clients. Her legal knowledge and skills were impressive. Almost immediately at the end of the interview, I recommended that CPCS offer her a job. Sarah was hired by CPCS, and although we did not work together, I constantly and consistently heard good things about her through my colleagues. 2 years later, our paths crossed again when I was appointed to the Boston Municipal Court and assigned to the Dorchester Division. On a number of occasions, Sarah appeared before me. Each time she was prepared, professional, and persuasive. Her advocacy was top-notch. She enjoyed an excellent reputation within the legal community. In 2021, while many of the COVID restrictions were in place, Sarah joined us in Dorchester as an assistant clerk magistrate. Over the past 3 years, Sarah and I have become very close. Yes, we discuss the law, but we also discuss our families and life in general. And in fact, I think of Sarah as a younger sister. Speaking of families, I would be remiss if I did not touch briefly upon Sarah's commitment to her actual biological family. She is a loving wife to Amy. She is a dedicated bonus mom to Otis and Felix, both teenagers, and Sarah works hard to ensure that each of them is valued for their individuality and for their life goals. She is a doting mom to her cats, Clark and Janet. She is a caring sibling, and she is a devoted daughter. Over the past several years, her parents have suffered from significant medical issues, and Sarah has routinely, no matter what's happening in her life, made the 3.5-hour drive to New York to spend time with her mother, father, and stepmother, sometimes within a 24-hour period, logging at least 7 or more hours on the roads in order to meet her family obligations in New York and in Massachusetts. Sarah joined us in Dorchester during a stressful time. As you know, things were turned upside down because of COVID, and we had a case backlog, we had Zoom issues, we had lots of issues. In addition, several experienced assistant clerk magistrates retired after working more than 30 to 40 years at the courthouse. Those were big shoes to fill, and Sarah filled them seamlessly. Quickly, she formed a strong relationship within the clerk's office. As you can tell by today, the presence of Amanda Ward, Jonathan Attess, and Rob Miller, 3 of her colleagues from the clerk's office. Dorchester has a high volume of cases. A large percentage of people appearing in our courthouse struggle with mental health issues, substance abuse disorder, on housing insecurity. Often the stress level and emotions are high. Without fail, Sarah treats every person with thoughtfulness, respect, and empathy. Additionally, for more than a year, our clerk's office has been in a transition due to our long-term clerk magistrate taking a lengthy leave before announcing his retirement. You can imagine how challenging it has been with 3 separate acting clerk magistrates filling in. At times, Sarah has acted as an unofficial first assistant to ensure that the clerk's office runs smoothly, efficiently, and effectively despite the disruptions. For me, it has always been a pleasure to work alongside Sarah in the courtroom. She works hard to be the most effective partner in the courtroom. She consistently displays initiative, diligence, and good temperament. She maintains excellent connections internally and externally, and at times she is a miracle worker. In fact, she remains the only person I know who has success in dealing with the federal prison legal authorities and sometimes is able to arrange for someone in federal custody to appear via Zoom, which is no small feat, and I would say that it's a miracle. Dorchester Court is like a family. Sarah is a beloved member of our courthouse family and is well regarded by court personnel and court users alike. First Justice Tynes, Judge Kaplanis, Judge Zaganuri, who is here, Judge Reese, and I wholeheartedly celebrate and support Sarah's nomination. As you know, people who appear in district court or one of the divisions within the BMC are in crisis. Sarah is well equipped with compassion, life experience, legal knowledge and skills, a strong moral compass, discretion, and a judicial judgment for anyone who enters her courtroom. My colleagues and I recommend her without doubt or reservation as someone who will ensure compliance to the trial court's mission of access to justice with speed and dignity. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has.
Thank you. Does any councilors have any questions? Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Counselor.
Pass through once in a while, but not too loud.
It's always nice to see you when you do come in. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, I guess that's it. You can, I just wanted to just say that, so how long have you known this nominee?
Since 2012. And since 2012 is when I met her, and I would say that we have become very close since 2021.
So what attribute would you give her that she's, the greatest attribute that she has that she's going to bring to the bench?
It's a tough question, but I'm going to answer the question you answer because I hate it when people ask me questions that don't answer the right question. I would say that she's compassionate, which is very important working in the district court.
You know, I won't vote for anyone if they don't have compassion, and we don't have all judges that have compassion, unfortunately. So thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
And our next witness is, oh my goodness. Thank you. Rachel in, okay, I'm going to try Rihalva. What did I do?
You did perfectly.
No kidding. Oh my gosh, you're just saying that. Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Governor's Council. My name is Rachel Grijalvo, and it is my great honor and privilege to have the opportunity to testify here today in support of my trusted colleague, wonderful mentor, and dear friend, Sarah Kennedy. I've been a public defender with CPCS for 13 years, and I've known Attorney Kennedy for 12 and a half of them. It was my good fortune that I joined the Boston District Court office just a few months before Attorney Kennedy decided to take her considerable knowledge from being an ADA in Middlesex County for 5 years and a sole practitioner for 2 years to join us. Despite technically having the title of staff attorney, she quickly became an unofficial supervisor and mentor to all the new attorneys in the office. We turned to her because of her intelligence, her legal know-how, and her invaluable perspective as a former prosecutor. She patiently and generously helped so many attorneys year after year navigate that steep learning curve that exists when figuring out how to practice in a busy, hectic courthouse like the BMC Central. At the same time, she also demonstrated to us how to adjust when practicing in a small community court like South Boston. Attorney Kennedy was with CPCS for about 9 years, and I had the pleasure of working down the hall from her for about 5. until she officially became a supervising attorney and moved over. In those 5 years that I worked so closely with her, I had the opportunity to witness all the ways she zealously advocated for her clients from day one. In front of judges, she was known as being prepared, trustworthy, and full of integrity, a defense attorney they could call on to handle a particularly tough case. To prosecutors, she was seen as smart and a skilled adversary, but also someone who was friendly, easy to work with, and proposed thoughtful, sensible resolutions. And to the people she represented, Attorney Kennedy always treated her clients with compassion and respect, earning their trust and forming genuine connections, even when they came from very different backgrounds. Attorney Kennedy has all the attributes that are needed in a district court judge. She's empathetic, level-headed, even-tempered, and eminently reasonable. She's seen how the district court functions from almost all sides, as a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and a clerk magistrate. So she is calm and unflappable when facing complex cases or difficult individuals. Whether it's a mentally ill woman who's having a meltdown in court and needs to be calmed down, or a developmentally disabled client who needs legal terms explained patiently and in bite-sized pieces, or a chronically homeless veteran who needs to be connected with the VA, or a middle-aged man struggling with substance use disorder for 20 years who is finally ready to try a residential treatment program, or an angry, distrustful young person with a trauma history who really needs patience, encouragement, and empathy. In my career, I've represented hundreds of people, and I can tell you that the clients really remember when judges take the time to speak with them, and it's not necessarily the judge that's the most lenient that they remember most fondly. It's the judge that has real compassion and took the time to make them feel seen, heard, and respected as a person, and not defined by what may be one of the worst or lowest or most embarrassing or shameful moments. If she is confirmed by this council as a district court judge, I wholeheartedly believe that Attorney Sarah Kennedy will be one of those judges that people will long remember as having a positive impact on their lives. Thank you.
Any councilors have any questions?
Thank you.
I'd just like to ask, so you could educate people, you are a public defender?
Yes, I've been an attorney with CPTS for years.
Well, would you tell us what is a public defender and how do you become one, and what are the duties and what are the qualifications to be a public defender? So all that.
So as a public defender, I work with the agency, the Committee for Public Counsel Services. We take on.
Excuse me, how do you get that position though? Because we're not familiar with it.
Sure. You apply to that position with requisite experience, such as having either been an attorney for a certain number of years with experience, either doing defense work as a bar advocate, or you could be straight out of law school with clinical experience, as I was. I went to BC Law. I took a clinic in the criminal defense practice there, and then I applied straight to CPCS right out of law school.
Okay, so under the Committee for Public Counsel, are they all public defenders?
So the CPCS is divided up into private counsel and public counsel. Counsel division is the public defender division.
The public counsel is?
Yes, the public counsel division. And then, so I'm actually currently in the private counsel division. So
The private counsels are not public defenders.
I would still call myself a public defender, but I take on a different type of case. I represent civilly committed individuals under the sexually dangerous person statute. So technically we're in the private counsel division, but there's also parole, the Innocence Project, that's also in the private counsel division. And the private counsel division also oversees the bar advocate program.
I usually don't ask. I mean, you're here to talk, to tell the councils what you know about the nominee. So you'll excuse me, I just want to educate people and myself to what you do, what that position is. So is it salaried? A public defender. Okay, if you're not a public defender and you're working for that council and you're a private attorney, then you don't get paid from the court. Is that right, from the government?
You get paid through CPCS. As a bar advocate, you would be a bar advocate and then you would bill through CPCS, and that would be under the private counsel division. So all of the attorneys who work for CPCS under the public counsel division are salaried. I am a salaried attorney, but I'm just under the private counsel division because so CPCS also has, mental health attorneys. My position is kind of in that mental health realm.
So there wouldn't be anyone in that division that you're in that isn't a public defender?
In my particular division, which is very small,
Wow. So tell me how you interacted with the nominee in your position.
sure. In several years, my office was down the hall from hers, and we would case crunch. We would talk about cases. Sometimes she would be in the court, and anytime she was in the court, all the attorneys knew that they could go to her for advice, to talk about their cases, to see what her perspective is as a former prosecutor, to talk about dispositions, what's reasonable, what's too far reaching. And she was always so level-headed about those things.
Right. So what do you think she brings to the bench that you see in her that maybe you don't see in other people that are looking for a judgeship?
So she is, as Judge Grant said, she is compassionate, and that would be my number one answer. But my number two answer, since Judge Grant already talked about her compassion, would just be her reasonableness. In district court, it is a hectic environment, and you have to be able to talk to each other to make things work. And she is so smart and level-headed and reasonable in her decision-making and her legal know-how that I think a court under Judge Kennedy would run very smoothly. Because she knows how.
Very much. No, you're teaching us a lesson. I appreciate that, and to know how you know the nominee and how long. That's very good. So I guess no other questions. Then thank you very much for your testimony. The next witness is Moya Gibson, attorney. Moya Gibson. Did I say it right?
You did, Moya Gibson.
Trying.
So good afternoon. My name is Moya Gibson. Right now, I am a bar advocate and private counsel with a criminal defense practice in Dorchester and the surrounds. It is my honor to speak to you about my good friend, Sarah Kennedy. I've known Sarah for almost 20 years. We first met when I was the supervising ADA of Somerville District Court. Sarah had been promoted over to become what's called the second in command. So in effect, she was my lieutenant. Now, Somerville is a great court. It's a very busy court. It will have, back in the day, it had school zone drug cases, gun cases, breaking and entering, serious domestic violence cases, OUIs. So we ran the full gamut of things. And Somerville had its own built-in challenges. First of all, the court closed at 4:30 p.m. We had to leave the building. We had an office in the basement. The supervisor's office was basically two wall dividers with an opening. I didn't have a door. And so, I got to see everything. I got to see the bullpen. But it meant we had to do a lot of remote work, which back in, the early aughts wasn't as easy as it is now. The other issue is that its trials were not held in Somerville. They were held over on 40 Thorndike Street, where the Cambridge District Court was.
Oh.
So it became, it was always a concern of mine because at least 2 days out of the week, I was going to be out of the building. And so my second had to be somebody I could rely on. And Sarah was it. Sarah, I can't think of anybody who was more responsible than Sarah. She made my life so easy. The second is really an unsung role. it will really set the tone and tenor of the DA's office, whether it's a group of 5 looking over their shoulders or whether it's a real team. And that's what Sarah brought to it. It was her demeanor. Now, Sarah is very intelligent. Sarah has an encyclopedic knowledge of statutes, which she would sometimes come up to my elbow and whisper to me. But, you know, her authority with the other ADAs was not because of her position or because of that knowledge. It was really because of who she was and her self-deprecating sense of humor. She is one of the most incredibly funny people you've ever met. And what it did was it took the tone of the DA's office down from very, hot topic to collaborative, to being able to talk about things back and forth without fear or favor, so that people could get those results. And the judges raved about her. The detectives raved about her. Probation loved her because she was in probation office all the time, asking questions. What are programs? What are these people like? And she'd really work hard to meet defendants where they were. And we've talked a lot about compassion here, and that's absolutely number one. District court, as everyone says, is exceptionally busy. Sometimes it's referred to as law by triage. And you have to be able to come with a full set of knowledge, then put that aside and actually listen to the person in front of you and look at that person and see why they're there on that particular day. And it was very noticeable to me that Sarah was about being creative in recommendations, not punishment per se, but how do we get this person to the next step? So she would speak with defense counsel, she would speak with the detectives, and then probation, and would bring a recommendation to me. I'm thinking of one particular case. It was a drug case. It was just shy of trafficking level cocaine, so it was less than 18 grams, but it was not a small amount. And the gentleman was young, but he had an interesting record. He was just, I would say, on the cusp of where we would recommend some jail time. And Sarah came to me with the rec, and it was probation. And, one of the other additional charges was resisting arrest. And so I was kind of like, Sarah, isn't this something where Commonwealth should really start asking for some jail time, anger management? And she turned to me and said, Moya, he just had a 2-month-old baby. He's been making it go with the mom. He lives with her mother and them. He doesn't need anger management. He needs sleep. And I was like, that's right. That's right. This gentleman had started working on his GED by himself. But Sarah worked with the defense attorney to find out who this person was before she put a number next to this young man's name. And I was always impressed by that because that takes a lot of work. It is very easy to cookie cutter recommendations. You look at the BOP, you look at the police report, there you go. Sarah was much more thorough. You could pick up her file if you had to stand in for her and know exactly what to do. It was organized, memos were drafted, written, presented. Her writing was always good. It got even better. But I have to say that it's something where it's not just about having the authority. It's not just about knowing the law. It's really talking and seeing people. And that, I think, now that I'm on the defense side, I see how my clients react to different judges. And I have seen them say, walking out after decision, she can walk anywhere in Dorchester. That was Judge Grant, by the way. Based on their demeanor, based on how they're treated. And it's like you say, it's their moment. And when you work in a court like this, you're thinking of the dozens of cases you have. Somerville had between 200 and 250 per ADA. Even as a defense attorney, we're up there. It's so easy to see people as files, but Sarah doesn't. Sarah sees them as people. And it's very impressive. Her ethics, her compassion, make her just an excellent choice.
Any questions from the Council Kennedy?
I'm a little confused. I kept hearing Attorney Kennedy as I say in the same sentence, and I'm not used to that.
It's excellent seeing you.
I was bouncing around Somerville Court on the other side of some of those cases.
Yes, that's right. I feel like I'm second seating her again.
A lot of Middlesex DAs floating around, coming in and out of here. There's at least one other that's in the room. Didn't come on his donkey today, but it's good to see you.
Excellent.
Any other councilors have any questions?
I just want to comment. I really appreciate just all that you shared with us and how you shared it, and so thank you.
Honestly, it's really my pleasure. This was not a hard ask.
Can you think of, it that comes to mind, something that really impressed you, a case that you had?
You know, one of the jobs as a supervisor is kind of being like a teaching attorney. And I remember walking down the hall with a brand new ADA and coming down the long corridor that goes from probation to third session in Somerville. And I was just showing this ADA around. And Sarah was working with a pro se defendant on an OUI plea. And I could tell because as we were turning the corner, I heard this very, very loud male voice that all of a sudden would come down. Very, very loud male voice suddenly come down. And I realized this was someone who was deeply distrustful of courts, of attorneys, of staff. And it was Sarah who was walking him through a green sheet, a plea sheet, and explaining what a continuance without a finding was, explaining what a disparate plea was, explaining the 24D program, and that while Middlesex may recommend a conviction, a guilty plea, there is this thing called a quaff, and it is okay for you to ask for it. And that is not a bad thing in front of the judge. And the young ADA turned to me and made this kind of aside, like, what is she, a defense attorney? And it was a great teaching moment for me because, like, no, we're the Commonwealth. We're supposed to be fair. It's not just opposing counsel. You have to meet people where they are. And I just remember thinking, she's doing it right. She's absolutely doing it right. I mean, she could have walked in and said, oh, yeah, put down guilty. No, she explained what a quaff was. And she couldn't tell him what to do. But she made it very, and as another witness said, put it in bite-sized pieces. And I thought, there you go. I mean, that could have been easy conviction on her belt, no problem. And the person would have walked off and would have never known. But she took it upon herself to make sure this gentleman, who again was very stressed, understood that he had a voice here and it may be different from hers. And that was fair. And I thought it was just wonderful. So I had a very long talk with that other ADA.
Well, thank you. Your experience with the nominee means a lot to the councilors. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone here in opposition to the nominee? Hearing none. Now we turn this over to you to tell us about yourself. And
First of all, I'm very humbled and honored to be here. I would like to thank my witnesses, family, and friends, and those who are watching online. I would like to thank the council members for your time and your consideration and your conversations. Thank you to Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll for nominating me to be an Associate Justice of the District Court, which would fill a long-time professional goal of mine. And I would like to thank the Governor's legal team, Paige Scott Reed and Dara Kesselheim, for shepherding me through the process. Thank you to the administrative staff of the Governor's Council, Valerie McCarthy and Sonia Altamirano, for all of their assistance. Thank you also to all of my colleagues in the Dorchester Court, especially all of the judges in Dorchester who continue to be available to guide me through this process and are some of my biggest cheerleaders. Thank you to Judges Oscar White and Audrey Murillo for their guidance and constructive feedback over these last months. A special thank you to retired Judge Michael Brooks for supporting me at each stage of my career and providing me with constant encouragement throughout this entire process. Finally, the biggest thank you to my wife and to our sons, Otis and Felix, who have listened to me talk about reaching this moment for years and have encouraged me and loved me through it all. My journey to this moment began in Ossining, New York, a middle-class town north of New York City. My mother was first-generation Italian-American who worked as a secretary in various local churches and religious organizations. My father, a second-generation Irish-American who worked in law enforcement for over 20 years, went to law school at night and practiced law after he retired from his government job. They moved to Ossining from the working class neighborhoods they grew up in. My mother was a self-proclaimed hippie. My father was not. While they couldn't agree on many things, they agreed on the important things, like instilling a strong work ethic in me and my sibling, and making sure we always did live by the most important rule, which is to treat others the way you want to be treated, with compassion, dignity, and respect. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my nonna, my Italian grandmother, who immigrated from Italy to the United States when she was 16 years old. Even though she had lived in this country since 1936 and was a naturalized citizen, she still struggled to communicate with others in English. I saw how some people treated her differently, lost their patience with her, or dismissed her entirely. Despite this treatment, my nonna always held her head high and handled these situations with grace. I left New York to attend Boston College, graduating in 1999. I returned home to Ossining after graduation and thought about what I would do next. I haven't always wanted to be a lawyer, but I always knew that whatever career I chose, it would be something where I helped people. Initially, I thought about becoming a psychologist, but ultimately decided being a lawyer is what I wanted to do. I started the evening program at Suffolk University Law School in the fall of 2000, and working as an assistant in a boutique patent law firm to support myself as I went through school. I graduated in 2004 and applied for positions at the district attorney's offices. I walked into a courtroom in 2005 as a member of the Middlesex District Attorney's Office, and I never looked back. Over the last 19 years, I spent my career in service to others as an ADA sole practitioner, representing mostly indigent defendants in criminal and post-conviction matters, then as an attorney with the Public Defender Division of the Committee for Public Counsel Services, and now an assistant clerk magistrate in one of the busiest courts in the Commonwealth, the Dorchester Division of the Boston Municipal Court. My parents divorced when I was young, and as a result, I spent most of my time living with my mom. She passed away just over 2 months ago, and as my sibling and I worked to clean out our childhood home, I have been reminded of so many lessons my mom taught me, and how so much of my life and the ways I interact with individuals personally and professionally has been shaped by her and the example she set for me and my sibling. When I was young, I saw my mom open her home and her heart to so many people from so many different walks of life. Some invited, some strangers that just showed up. She welcomed them, fed them, listened to them, treated them with kindness. She lived her life in a truly empathetic, selfless, and compassionate way. As a child, I thought she was crazy for inviting the young man who just escaped from the treatment center down the street in for coffee and for something to eat. I eventually came to understand that what she did was make that young man feel safe and heard, and kept him calm until the staff member she had called arrived to return him to that treatment center. As a teenager, she made me volunteer at the church soup kitchens and holiday food drives. She would pin a boycott list on the refrigerator of different companies and whose business practices were negatively affecting the lives of other people on the other side of the world. My sibling recently found a letter our mom received from PepsiCo thanking her for sharing her concerns over the business practices in Burma, present-day Myanmar. Now, I didn't necessarily boycott all of these products, but that wasn't the point she was trying to make. The point was to show me that my community was so much bigger than my own town, my own family, and my circle of friends and acquaintances. My community was a global one in which my seemingly inconsequential decisions did in fact have a very real consequence for people I would never meet. My mom taught me patience, compassion, the importance of meeting people where they are, and recognizing that differences aren't weaknesses, but strengths. My papa always worked hard and seemed to be able to do, build, or fix almost anything. He taught me to set goals, develop a plan to execute those goals, and carry out the plan. When I was little, BMX-type scooters were all the rage, and when I asked my papa to get me one, he said no. Then he explained, "You can have the scooter, and I will help you pay for it, but you will need to figure out how you are going to contribute to your share of the cost of the scooter." I did extra chores, some of which I'm sure he made up just to help me earn my share, and I got that scooter. Through these experiences and many others, my parents gave me the tools and strength I would need to face some of my own challenges and struggles with being different. I'm lucky to be married to my amazing wife and stepmom to 2 amazing teenage boys, and I'm very proud of my family and comfortable and confident in who I am. But I didn't always feel that way. I've experienced anxiety and fear of coming out to friends and family, worried that my differences would somehow weaken or even end the relationships I had built over the years and relied on in so many different facets of my life. Fortunately, I have flourished with their love, understanding, and support, even when it may have started out as denial or toleration. Not only am I gay, but to address the elephant in the room, I am also very short, 4'9" short. I have often been underestimated and overlooked literally throughout my life. Whether trying out for the varsity basketball team or meeting a victim or client for the first time, the look I receive is often the same. It is one that questions my ability to do my job effectively and successfully. However, I have worked hard not to let these experiences build a chip on my shoulder or react defensively. Instead, like my Nonna, I hold my head high and often use humor to diffuse what could always be or often be an awkward or contentious situation. I use these experiences as a catalyst to work harder and to be prepared to handle the task at hand. Because of my experiences, I am very cognizant of the fact that a person's outward appearance often is not a reflection of who they are or how they are feeling. This is especially true of the many individuals who find themselves involved in the court system. When I met a victim, client, or community member at the counter of the clerk's office, I recognized that I was meeting this person on one of their worst days. They were scared. I knew that their anger or harsh words or disrespect weren't directed at me. They were a product of their current circumstance. Because of this, I was able to remain calm, respectful, and patient as I helped them navigate the ins and outs of the trial court. These are things I would continue to do as a judge should my nomination be confirmed. My professional and personal experiences have given me a deep appreciation for the importance of representation in positions of power within the court, and have prepared me to make informed, empathetic, practical, fair, albeit difficult decisions in matters that directly impact individuals' lives, families, mental health, well-being, and freedom. My mother had dementia for the last few years, but during one of the last conversations we had before she passed away, she marveled at the idea that a granddaughter of two people who never finished grade school in Italy could become a judge in Massachusetts. She said, "How amazing is that?" And I could not agree more. It would be the greatest honor to continue to serve the people of the communities of the Commonwealth. As an Associate Justice of the District Court, should my nomination be confirmed. Thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Now, you have an opportunity to introduce everyone in the room that's here for you, to support you.
Nice break. Miller, he is the person in charge of our office in the Dorchester Division. Judge Lisa Grant, you've met. My wife, Amy. My sibling, B. Victoria Ranieri, who I worked with at CPCS. Rachel Grijalvo, who you've met. Judge Samir Zaganori, who also is in Dorchester, but has known me since we were baby DAs. Amanda Ward, also an assistant clerk magistrate in Dorchester. Jonathan Tess, who is now with probation, but was an assistant clerk magistrate. You've also met Moya Gibson.
So,
That's it.
so I'm calling, we're supposed to go to the right, is that the rule? So that would be Counselor Ionel.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Story. I have that coupled with your work experience, strong supporter, and Councilor Kennedy, who called me on your behalf. I'll make it easy. When your name comes before the council, you can count on my vote.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Dunn.
Wow. Usually has more questions, so you've been very impressive. Great story. You have a stellar reputation. I mean, especially in the CPCS world and the work that you've been doing in the courts. We've had the opportunity to talk a few times. What do you see as one of the biggest challenges in District Court?
I see one of the biggest challenges is actually procuring and keeping certified interpreters. I think it's very important for people who find themselves in the court system to be able to have meaningful representation, meaningful understanding of the hearings they're supposed to be participating in. And that can't be done if the person about whom the hearing is unable to fully appreciate what's happening because either the interpreter isn't present or the interpreter is not in their native language or their first language. or that they have to wait there from 8:30 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon just to be arraigned on a charge because we can't obtain an interpreter in person. And even then, when we do, there's someone who appears on Zoom. So I think that that's a very big challenge to the district courts.
Do you think, this is just an objective question, you're not being held to anything for it. Do you think it's because there aren't enough people doing it, or are we not paying enough?
I think that it probably is a combination of both. I think that, I know that there are interpreters who are splitting their time between 2 or 3. And I think that, if they could divide themselves and be present in every court, they would, but they can't. So I think that it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. It's, you know, I don't believe our CPCS can spend enough money. I don't think our ADAs make enough money. I think it's a big problem. I don't think a lot of people in a lot of these agencies make enough money, and that's why we've got a lot of problems, is because we can't retain people. And, you know, my wife owned a business, and, you know, 20 years ago, she was paying people $15 an hour in a restaurant. But she didn't have any place. She said that saved her money. People never understand it. You know, they didn't have an official policy of, you know, paid time off and things like that. But if someone was sick, she sent them and it paid them. Someone died in the family, she sent them home and she paid them, because that created a loyalty to her organization, and she was able to run a really successful, very small, tiny shop for 27 years doing that. So I don't think people understand the cost of having turnover all the time. And I learned it from her. She really like drilled it right down to me. So it was like, you know, it's math. And I love numbers, and math doesn't lie. I mean, it's a factual thing. So thank you for sharing that, because that's interesting. You know, I shared with you the things that are most important to me. LGBTQ people, I'm not particular, you know, you're part of the community. I'm sure you're gonna have compassion and knowledge in how to handle folks like that. If someone appears and needs, you know, special accommodation for whatever reason. People with different needs, some of them could be physical, some could be developmental, and that we are aware and compassionate, doesn't absolve somebody of a crime. If they have a special need or developmental disability, but it doesn't mean they need to treat them a little bit differently and with more compassion. Do you have experience at all with that community in your work?
I do, actually. I've been fortunate enough to represent both people with physical difficulties as well as developmental difficulties. And there were times when, you know, some of the courts didn't have wheelchair access. And so what would happen is that I would, you know, unfortunately would have to file a motion, and a client of mine who, you know, lived in a certain area of the district of Boston, a different district, because they had wheelchair access. I think that the trial court has done a lot to improve those issues and make almost all of the courts much more accessible, which I appreciate. And same thing with developmental disabilities. I've had clients who have dealt with those types of issues as well. And as someone was saying earlier, I think it's just important you take the time to listen to them, to explain things in smaller necessary, helpful, and sometimes just listening and then repeating yourself and then listening again, and just showing that patience is important.
Well, you know, the most important day of someone's life is usually the day they appear in court, and it doesn't really matter what it's for. They want to win, but more than that, they want to be treated with respect and to be heard. And I think we're doing a lot on that. You know, it's disheartening to this chamber that the judiciary is one branch of government, yet gets, you know, less than 5% of the state budget. And so it's real hard for us to fix buildings and make it successful. But the truth of the matter is, all of us are gonna be, probably 98% of us, in some capacity, disabled at some point, whether it's mobility, whether it's sight, whether it's hearing, you know, whatever it is. It's not them, it's us. And I think the sooner folks start realizing that, maybe a little bit more compassion. But I think that our courts have done, and our chiefs have done a great job with very, very limited resources. And so my speech to this, and certainly I'm listening, is to put pressure on the legislature to give us some more money. The last thing that I talked to you a little bit about, things that are very concerned to me, that in this environment we live in today, that seems to have become more contentious as the last few years have gone on. Judges are more under attack than they've ever been. They may make a decision that the public doesn't agree with, or we don't understand, and people call for impeachment, they call for them to be removed, they protest at their homes, they protest at their courts. I think that's, to me, that you don't do that. You know, it's very uncivil. And it's been something, you know, because there are people in the US Supreme Court that I don't care for at all, but I've had to really stop and think about, you know, do I really walk the talk? Do I really believe this? Is there an exception? There's not an exception. Judges need to feel safe, and their families need to feel safe in the work that they do. And so we spoke about this a little bit, but I don't think this is an issue that can be underemphasized. Folks need to have a support system. You need to have hard conversations with your family, your friends, and your children. At some point, something could happen, particularly in the district court, you could make a ruling. Someone could get let out and commit a horrific crime, and people are gonna blame you. And you're just a person, you know, you're a person trying to do your best. And so,
As we discussed, it is an important issue, and it is something that I have put some thought into. My wife and I have talked a little bit about it. Decisions certainly to, you know, do our best to keep our, you know, personal addresses and those kinds of things as private as we can, but understand that there might come a time where something like that happens, and we certainly our faith and trust in law enforcement authorities to protect us and to investigate if necessary. And we'll speak to our children about it as well, thankfully a little bit older, and so I think that they will appreciate and can appreciate the dangers, but also recognize that the probability of something like that happening is pretty low. So they feel comfortable with that, but it is something that we've started to discuss.
yeah, I think it's an unfortunate conversation we have to have. But, you know, a few years back, I can't remember how long ago it was, there was a Superior Court judge in Salem, which is my district, who made a decision that for the life of me, I couldn't understand. The irony of the whole thing was, this was a pretty law and order guy, pretty by the book, probably more conservative. He made this ruling and everyone's like, get rid of that liberal, you know, protest this, and there at his house. They went to the court. There were people protesting outside the court, and those court workers were so shaken up. The assaults that they were subject to day after day, it was outrageous. I spent an entire day in that court talking to every single employee about their experience and trying to, you know, let them know that we saw them, we felt them, we knew that it was a wrong thing. But it was astounding to me that elected officials thought that was an okay thing to do. Because I don't think it is. I mean, like I said, for the life of me, I could figure, you know, I don't know how he got to it. I'm not the judge. I don't see what you see. You know, you're as the judge has access to information we don't have. And we have to, and that's, you know, why we have separation of powers and everything. We have to respect the office. And so it's one of the reasons I talk about it. It's because in my district, it was very real. And the people in that city, they don't forget. They were verbally assaulted by people. Like I said, some elected officials actually went there and protested. It was outrageous to me. So I think you're going to do a great job. Thank you for applying. You have not just, you know, the academic background and everything. You have the life experience and the compassion that we really look for, because, you know, what's important is the stuff that can't be quantified on paper. You know, your life experience. And that's what will inform you, and probably informs you how you move in the world right now already. And I think you and I will move in the world because I'm not real tall either. And people treat me very differently because of it. I'm not 5, I lie how tall I am now. But people treat me very, very, very differently because of my height. And it's kind of, as the older I get, the more fascinating it is, actually. So anyway, thank you for your application. I'm finished, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Duff. Councilor Kennedy.
I know,
At least 19 years.
and pretty well over those years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Almost.
Councilor DePaul.
The counselor to my left is a big fan. Made that clear. You'd be an excellent teacher. You've demonstrated an incredible command of pedagogy here this morning. I'm interested in the way you articulated. First off, I want to talk about the translation issue in a second, but the way you talked about folks with developmental disabilities or other challenges in processing language and the way that essentially we're translating for them too. And it's an extra step that I see often skipped over. And so I appreciate that. You talked about in your application around translators and the availability of translation. Step one, wanting to collect data about, the whole situation, right? I'm wondering, are there other areas, and what would they be? What would be a couple other areas that for you would be very important for the courts to be ensuring that they're gathering and reflecting upon data about?
It's an interesting question. I think that the more data you have about the communities that the court serves, I think the better it can be. So whether it's data about languages that are used, data about services that are provided, whether it's the need for mental health or any types of rehabilitative or substance use disorder services. I think those are important because I think that the communities benefit from that. And I don't think every community has access to those things. And so perhaps by having a better understanding of the numbers of the need, is a good way to try and, if you can, then do better to address that need.
And advocate for them. So I wonder.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt. Aaron, could you please, who's broadcasting this, could you please show the counselors who are speaking? We didn't see Councilor Duff. We don't see people on the council speaking, and people at home want to know who's speaking. Thank you.
I would have done my hair better.
Sorry.
It's actually not about us, so.
I lost myself for a moment. Oh, okay. So regarding, like, for example, the racial disparities that have been documented in our system, and as I was saying at a hearing this morning, the Gantt study, the data is becoming outdated at this point. It revealed some interesting things that I think sparked important conversations. I mean, Black and Latino defendants similarly situated finding themselves put into superior court versus district court when there's concurrent jurisdiction at twice the rate of white defendants. Certainly the sentencing disparities that largely happen in superior court. I'm wondering, are there areas where you suspect, where you think that data around the racial demographics of the folks coming through our district courts would be valuable?
I do. Again, I think the more that we know, the more numbers we can put to things, the better we can address issues. I think that the trial court has been doing a good job of starting to take into account the demographics of the different communities and addressing those biases and those indiscrepancies between people of color and white individuals who see themselves court involved and the way that they're treated both in sentencing and just generally. So I do think that having more information on those demographics, again, has been helpful thus far and certainly could be more helpful going forward in terms of really implementing types of programs and trainings that will help at some point alleviate those discrepancies, those biases.
I asked a question this morning as well that I'll ask to you. There was a recent case in Superior Court where I give the judge a lot of credit because the judge corrected the order that had been made. But a young woman was appearing in the court presenting with profound mental health challenges and had been out of her school district because she was challenging the placement that the school district was willing to provide for her. And that child was ordered to return to the public school under the reasoning, and I'll paraphrase, that it wasn't a dangerous place, and essentially this is what the child needs. The child needs to be in school. And I found it to be, and again, I credit the judge for reversing, it was a misunderstanding of the needs of the child. And I think it revealed a bias in the judge of what the judge considered to be important regarding education and what the judge considered to be appropriate for what a child should be doing. Because the child did return to school and there was complicating incidents, and the child was removed from school again right away. And that trauma is not going away. So that child, who's probably going to be court involved in other ways, doesn't trust the courts, right? And has experienced the double trauma of being forced back into the school. I'm wondering, and you've alluded to things like this, are there areas where you've caught yourself you've caught your bias and you've needed to correct yourself?
Well, I certainly, strive on a daily basis to be aware of my own implicit bias. I think that that's something that's very important to always, be willing to address and always sort of at the forefront of your mind. And I think that there have been times, I guess, I don't know if it's a bias, but I perhaps thought too quickly that someone was not having the difficulties they were having in understanding something. So someone who, a client of mine presented very together, very articulate, all of that on his face didn't appear to have, to me, any issue sort of understanding what was happening. But the more I spoke with him and the more I just sort of cast my assumptions aside and, had a conversation with him, like taking time to hear what he was saying and more importantly, hear what he was not saying. I think I was able to better adjust how he and I, interacted.
We heard an anecdote about a young man, a gentleman who had a baby at home, the whole story we heard. I mean, as a judge, are you going to have the time anymore to dig in and find this stuff out?
I think at times it would be important to ask the right questions as a judge. I think that if I'm making a decision about someone's life, which will be my job, then I have to ask those important questions. I have to gather as much information as I can, even in a short bit of time, to make as informed decision as I can. That obviously is going to directly affect someone else. So,
and I would think, having been at CPCS, and by the way, people from CPCS reached out to me about you as well and had very high things to say. You sometimes are dealing with clients who aren't forthcoming. They don't necessarily trust you or trust the counsel they've been assigned, right? And so you have that perspective as a judge, potentially. What's your opinion regarding raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction?
I think that it's certainly something that's important to consider and to continue reviewing. See, there are studies, as in most scientific things, studies keep putting more data is available. Different types of findings come from those scientific investigations. So I do think that there is science and there is a reason to believe that younger people, even over the age of 18, think differently, react differently. Part of that, I think, is some of what I've read scientifically. Most of it is probably being the parent to a 16-and-a-half-year-old and an 18-and-a-half-year-old who do not think similarly to myself.
Sure.
And particularly the almost 19-year-old, right? He's an adult. He's making decisions at times where, probably a little too impulsive, but.
Yeah, I think the findings of fact that were issued ahead of the Mattis decision are pretty good picture of where we're at with the science, although that and the Mattis decision both note that they stopped short of any further investigation. They limited themselves to what was particularly in front of them in the situation. I'm particularly concerned about folks who've experienced childhood abuse and trauma, whose brain development is further delayed based on the science we have. And I'm wondering, as you consider each defendant's unique situation, how much childhood would play into that and how much brain development would play?
It would definitely play a part in the decision-making process for me. As I've explained, or you've heard also, I have represented both younger individuals, people who have experienced trauma. And there is a difference and it does matter. And so, as a judge, I would take all of those things into consideration, everyone's history, their sort of, again, meeting people where they're at to the best of my ability and trying to fashion dispositions and decisions that, you know, take as many things into account as possible.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate your
Thank you.
help on this. Yes. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Council Jacobs.
Well, hello, it's good to see you. We sat down and had a really rich discussion that covered a lot of ground and got to know you very well. And I don't have that many questions to bring today, but I have a couple areas just to further explore with you. The first is just, you know, first a reflection on your really diverse experiences. You've kind of covered it all between, you know, serving in the DA's office, yes, and now is in the clerk's office, the work you're doing in the courts. And I want to hear from you, having had these experiences, if there's any takeaways or learnings from each of those different lenses in terms of emphasis that you think will inform how you would serve on the bench.
Sure. I mean, I think every type of experience that I've had and every, you know, division of my career I've had has informed the next step. Where I think that part of what made me very, very exhausted as a defense attorney was that I had into how to prosecute cases and understanding what the weaknesses of prosecutors' cases would be, understanding what their limitations were in terms of their caseloads and their, you know, access to the ability to investigate things further or not. And similarly, the experiences that I've had as a defense attorney dealing, you know, on a much more personal level with people, again, from all different walks of life, has informed the way that I continue to interact with members of the community that I serve now in Dorchester. So certainly all of these different experiences have built on each other. And I think that it gives me a not complete, but a more complete sort of perspective and understanding of the court system and understanding of what my role would be as a judge. And that would be first and foremost to serve my community. And I can do that by understanding the community, learning from the community, and always learning to better myself to be in a position where I can continue to help.
I appreciate that. The next area I wanted to talk to you about was kind of been thinking about it's specifically, I guess, the district court around gender identity and two main areas. One being respectful, not assuming gender shared that may not line up with the legal documentation, how the court sort of proceeds in addressing people who are presenting as maybe not their born gender or transgender or non-binary, sort of the cultural context around how the court interacts in those cases. And then the second area, in the event there is going to be lockup happening for someone who identifies as a transgendered person or non-binary. I don't know about the entire state, but you know, my part of the state, there's only one sheriff who, actually no, I'm wrong, there's two sheriffs who have multiple gender facilities. So a couple of my counties send all the women to Hampden County. I think Franklin County has a very tiny little unit. But in terms of placement, like, you know, where would it be, you know, would it be within the purview of the judge to have an impact on that? Does it entirely land on the sheriffs to figure this out? Is there a consideration given for the safety factor, depending on the choice made, how much of the person's personal feelings about where they would feel safe are reflected in the choice made in terms of placement. And I will say, I have heard of people who, on the sheriff's side, I don't know about the prison side, but on the sheriff's side, sometimes in an effort towards safety, will place in it's kind of a, not like solitary in the sense of like you're going to the hole, but you're in your own cell by yourself, mostly contained away from population for safety's sake. And yet that condition to me is unsafe psychologically, in that it's like almost a torture to be isolated to the extent that sometimes it's not. And I just said a lot of things and maybe there's not like a question there, but my question really is from your perspective as a sitting district judge. Both the first section around sort of the culture of respect around gender, identity, but then the second about safety and placement, your thoughts about if any impact that role you can have.
Sure. So as the first part, in terms of the cultural aspects of transgender, non-binary, that are conforming within the court system, we have people who don't identify as their assigned gender at birth. They identify the opposite or just don't identify at all. And I think that the trial court, again, is working very hard towards installing trainings that help people sort of understand better how to respect individuals' identities. And so in Winchester, we have a few different members of the community who don't identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. And so some of our official documents, our complaints, have been amended to reflect their chosen name and to remove their dead name, so to speak. And so we will address them by who they are, how they identify. There have been instances also where that an individual might say, "Oh, it's just easier, just call me by my dead name," and for legal documents and all that, rather than changing everything. So I do think it's important to, again, hear the input from the person. How do they want to be identified? How do they want to be addressed? That's the most important. As to the second issue regarding who are non-binary or don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, in terms of incarcerated or being held pretrial, I think it's a more difficult issue to address as a judge. I think that judges can make recommendations about where people should be housed, whether it's, based on the gender they identify with, whether it's based on, again, like a potential safety issue. But those types of decisions, I think, really are within the purview of the sheriff's departments. They have the authority to determine what's safe and what's not safe, how they deal with that. So I have had clients who were assigned male at birth, identify as female, and were able to be housed at South Bay, but it didn't always happen. And then I have clients who were more than comfortable to Nashua Street, which is the all-male facility, because people knew them there, right, as who they were. That's that individual's experience and that individual's preference. So I think it's important to respect, again, the input of that individual. That person has an idea of where they feel safe, but I can only make recommendations as a judge with respect to that, and it really would be up to the sheriff's departments.
I appreciate that. I appreciate all of that. You know what, I'm good. We talked for so long about so many things. I feel like I have a really good sense of who you are, and how you think about things and how you approach things. So I thank you for your time and
Council Ferraro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had long, thoughtful, deliberate conversations. We did. I appreciate that. You took a long, hard time reflecting before you wrote your resume. Right? Is there anything you'd like to change today on either one of these things? We wouldn't retract anything? It was important to know your audience when you apply for these jobs, right?
I do.
So you really intended to put down avid New York Yankees and New York Giants fans?
I was prepared for this particular Yes, in part because I am, and in part because it stimulates conversation, right? It's someone's attention, good or
Might
bad.
be able to, you might be able to redeem yourself because you also said you're an amateur karaoke singer.
That's correct.
Belt out a song.
Don't tempt me. No, not right now, but I have been known to break out into song.
You came with glowing recommendations, especially from Councilor Kennedy, who's known you for a couple of decades, and I put a lot of reliance on that. A good judge of character. I know he's been in the courtroom more than anyone else I know on the planet. So that means a lot to me. You and I discussed it. You have a great resume. You're really good at making your friends cry back here. And you'll have my vote next week.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Council. Well, thank you for all the time that you afforded me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did meeting you. And that's important, to know the whole person. And that's what I believe in. I am very impressed with your background. You've had people here that were witnesses. And I also neglected to recognize Judge Sami Zangajuri, and I am so sorry I overlooked that. But I just wanted to say that if you can explain this, because I've never seen this before, you only had a private practice for 1 year. And that's a big deal to establish being a private attorney, getting an office, getting the shingle, doing the whole thing, and for a year. Tell us about that.
Sure. So we talked about this. So I had been applying after I left the DA's office. I had tried some civil litigation, medical malpractice, but really had wanted to return to the practice of criminal law. That's really where I'm home. So I started applying to be a defense attorney, and I did that through applying to bar advocate programs, so the Suffolk Lawyers for Justice, Middlesex Defenders, as well as applying to the Public Defender's Office, so to the Committee for Public Counsel Services to be a staff attorney. But in between then, I wanted to gain some of that experience. So I was fortunate enough to be able to obtain office space in a sort of way. I didn't have to pay for the real estate, but I paid for the office when I needed it. I was able to have an answering service. And so in that way, I was able to keep my overhead sort of low because my ultimate goal was really to try and work for the Public Defender's Office as a staff attorney. And so during that time, I was able to take cases from, I was lucky enough to have defense attorneys who referred clients to me. I was lucky enough to also be, through the Massachusetts Bar Association, be able to represent individuals who were marginally indigent, meaning they might not have qualified for a court-appointed attorney, but couldn't afford necessarily a high rate. So I was able to represent those people. And it also gave me some experience to do post-conviction work. So working on some appellate briefs, which I think helped my overall knowledge of law. But my goal really had been to try and work for a public defender's office. I enjoy the collegiate atmosphere of the district attorney's office. I really knew that I thrived in that kind of environment. And so if I had to have made a go of it as a sole practitioner, I knew I could have. But the reason that it was such a short-lived practice was because I was fortunate enough to be hired as a staff attorney by the public defender's office.
You like to write?
I do.
And so you chose this particular writing to include in your questionnaire. Tell us about that.
Sure. So what I included is a portion of a brief that I wrote in support of a potential an interlocutory appeal that was not taken up by the SJC, and in retrospect, it shouldn't have been. But I thought it had some interesting issues about search and seizure law and what constituted a stop. And so that's what I submitted. It was a portion of my brief that outlined facts and circumstances surrounding my client's interaction with the police and the law that I thought supported my argument, which was that stop occurred earlier than the judge in the lower court found it to be, and that my position was the motion should have been allowed. But so that was what I wrote about, just a search and seizure issue.
Well, looking back at your, career, what was the most serious, dangerous criminal case that you had?
I guess there are two that come to mind, but I suppose the one that's most serious was the one in which my client was charged with an attempted murder by strangulation and a couple of other assault and battery charges, and assault and battery dangerous weapon. It was important because there were a lot of legal issues to deal with. It was important because my client suffered from a traumatic brain injury, as well as he was in recovery from substance use disorder. And so I had a lot of individual things to deal with him. He was one of my clients who did have to break down the legal issues and have many more discussions with him in short bits of time because he couldn't hold his attention very long due to his traumatic brain injury. It was serious because of what he was charged with. There was a lot of investigation. I had witnesses who also were not without their own issues. One of my main witnesses was someone who was also developmentally challenged. So it was serious because of the charge, and it was important because of all the work that I put into it and all the things I learned from it. I learned how to better communicate with my client. I learned how to better communicate with individuals who didn't think the same way I did or thought differently than I did. And
There was a case that you had that was someone who attacked a disabled person. Remember that one?
there was one, I think, where I prosecuted a case where the individual accused in that case had been accused of committing assault and battery on a elderly or disabled person.
And he was acquitted. Tell us, how does that happen?
So in that case, he was acquitted in part because of the decisions that the judge made in terms of motions that the defense attorney made in suggesting, or arguing that I hadn't met certain elements of the crime. And so he was not acquitted fully. He was convicted of the assault and battery, but he wasn't convicted of the full charge of assault and battery on a disabled person.
Tell me about your experience in the Committee for Public Counsel Service. What was your title? I know you're a supervisor. Is that the title, supervisor? Nothing?
So I started as a staff attorney. I started with the Boston District Office, and as a staff attorney there, I took cases out of different divisions of the Boston Municipal Court, mostly in the Central Division and the South Boston Division. Within that Boston office, there was also at the time a Superior Court unit. Since then, the offices are now sort of hybrid offices where the more experience you have, the more difficult cases you can take. But at that time, you had to be in the Superior Court. Was promoted to that unit. I then took cases out of the Dorchester Division and Central Division, but my cases were focused on matters that were going to be indicted and then prosecuted in the Superior Court. And after that, I applied to be a supervisor in the Lawrence office, and that.
Now, in that position, how are you salaried? Who pays you? Is that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? Is it the court? What is it?
Commonwealth. So
Three Commonwealth
services
Okay.
designated under the legislature.
I see. So, and you were there how many years?
There for 9 years.
9 years. Okay, so you've been in this position 3 years, right?
As assistant clerk.
Okay, if you can tell me now the new position for people out there, assistant clerk magistrate, okay, in the Dorchester Division of the Boston Municipal Court. Would you tell the public what your duties were differently than the clerk magistrate? Because you were the assistant, so tell us what the difference of the duties are.
Well, the differences are just that basically I can do everything that the clerk magistrate can do, but I need someone who is in a position to assist the magistrate in whatever way that magistrate needs to ensure that the office is running smoothly and efficiently, and that the individuals in the community are getting the services that they need. So, so that's really the only.
What can't you do to tell people, what can't you do in that position as a clerk magistrate? What is the difference?
I can't assign people what their duties are for that week. So In my office, as of right now, we get assignments for our jobs for the week, basically. So I could be in show cause hearings while, ACM Ward could be, running the first session. And so those are the types of things, the magistrate.
So how many assistant clerk magistrates are there in that court?
In the Dorchester division, I think 8 or 9. I mean,
8 or 9?
8 or 9, yeah.
And, okay, so, in clerk magistrates, how many clerk magistrates?
One clerk magistrate.
That's one.
Yes, so the clerk magistrate is appointed.
Okay, so, in your experience through the years, and y'all, and pretty busy, the Dorchester division, what do you see that needs to be changed? That if you could, what would you like to change in that court?
I know I keep coming back to it, but it really is, it is the access to interpreters. The Dorchester division serves such a diverse community, and many of the members of the community, English is not their first language. And there's a variety of different languages that are spoken. So Haitian Creole, Korean Creole, Vietnamese are prevalent languages that are spoken. And more often than not, we don't have those interpreters present, or if we do, like I was saying earlier, they're on Zoom, where they can't get there until 12, we're notified in the morning whether we're first on the list or second on the list for a specific kind of interpreter.
In your experience, have you seen racial discrimination in the court?
Yes.
Yeah. What do we do about it?
I think we do our best again to.
Why is it that it's never, no judge has ever brought up, to talk about what he's done or she's done and be held accountable and have them removed if that's their philosophy? I don't understand that part of it at all.
Well, I don't know why that hasn't happened. I don't know if it hasn't happened. All I know is that what I would do is do my best again to check my implicit bias, to bring myself back to the person in front of me, whoever that is. And I think that by doing that,
On the council, we have the Industrial Accident Board, and we have sort of a report card, which I love. And I wish we had it for the judges, because it tells us how many cases they've had, how many days have you been appealed, and they're in competition with the rest of the board. And it tells us, have there been any complaints from people, from lawyers, about discrimination or prejudice? What a wonderful thing that we had that opportunity, so that when we are thinking about, should this person be reappointed, we know what their record is. We don't. I wish we had that evaluation with judges, and I know the good judges would never, ever be opposed to that, and it is too bad. I have nothing to do with that. Tell me about gender. Is there any gender discrimination in the courts that you see?
I think that the trial court has been doing a very good job again with training and classes on, again, recognizing all these different biases, whether it's of our own or around us, and giving us tools to address those issues when we see them in a more thoughtful and productive way. With respect to me personally, I think that there have been times where as a young female attorney, as a young female ADA, I may have been perhaps put through the ringer a little bit more than maybe my male counterpart. But I was also really fortunate enough to work in a district attorney's office that was very supportive of women in the law. And the district attorney at the time was a woman, my supervisor was a woman, and all of my supervisors were women that I can think of. And so I think that being in that environment helped me sort of stay strong when I was facing those issues, and also sort of showed me the path.
What do you think? Do you think some of these older judges, maybe they should have some kind of a program to make them understand, and maybe inwardly to find out if they have any prejudices or they don't understand? Do you think that would be helpful to have a program for these judges?
I think, like I said, the trial court does have for everyone who's employed by the trial court, to, again, sort of tease out these issues, these implicit biases, these inner thoughts that we might not even be aware that we have or experience or have acted on. So the trial courts are addressing it, and I think they're addressing it across the board for any employee. And I think that that's important, and everyone's moving in the right direction with these types of trainings.
Okay. Well, thank you. As I said, it was a pleasure meeting with you. I love to get people to interview them and meet with them so they know the whole person. And I feel like I know your family and how you've been brought up and everything. So, they have to be proud. Your family has to be proud of you. And I will be very proud next Wednesday to put your name in nomination and have the council vote. So I thank everyone for being here, and good luck. And I'm looking forward to next Wednesday. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Adjourned.